Welcome everyone. Want to welcome you to this virtual interactive session, Modern Legal Words Interpreting in Court. My name is Sam Boka and I work for New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice as a Community Engagement Officer. And I will help co-facilitate the webinar today with my colleagues from Legal Aid, Natalie Newman. Natalie, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. I'm from Legal Aid, from the Community Legal Education branch. And I'll do some of the housekeeping and welcome you in a minute, but I'll let Sam continue for now, and we'll also introduce the panel in a minute as well. Thanks, Sam.
It's such a pleasure working with you, Natalie, in delivering this great webinar. But before we start, I want to first acknowledge that we are on an Aboriginal land. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and give thanks to people from the First Nation on which we are living and working. This land always was, always will be an Aboriginal land. I want to also acknowledge any Aboriginal colleagues who are with us today. Before we start the webinar, I want also to acknowledge that the language used in court can be very intimidating, and court can be an intimidating environment for a lot of people. The language could be a foreign language to a lot of us. That's why we try today to unpack that language use and learn more about the courtroom etiquettes and formalities. So I will hand it over to Natalie to give us an outline of today's webinar structure and also to introduce the panelists. Over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Sam. So, welcome everyone as well. We have a lot of people joining us today. We were very overwhelmed that we had over 500 people register for this session today. So thank you for your interest, and we expect to have several hundred people joining us today. So although we have said this is an interactive webinar, we may not be able to answer all your questions today, but we still encourage you to ask questions. We've had a few questions coming through already for people who can't hear or see the webinar, but we're hoping most of you can. I'll just go through the housekeeping, and that might help resolve some of those issues. So hopefully you can see on your screen there how to ask questions, and I know some of you have typed in already today. There should be a question box where you can type in questions. We don't have a function to put your hand up or for you to ask questions out loud today because we have so many people, but you should be able to see a question box on your screen where you can type in questions. Some of you have said you can't hear us. There should be a sound check on your screen. So we suggest to do the sound check, and also to check your own volume or mute functions on your own device. Also, there are other options you can select. If you can't see the question box or the panel that I'm talking about, there should be a little orange arrow to click. Next, you might only be able to see one of the speakers. So if that's the case, you can actually select on your screen who you can see. There should be a drop down for you to either see all the panelists or just the person who is speaking. So you can have a bit of control about what you see on your screen. So you should be able to see that on the instructions now. Just so we can check if you can hear us today, can you please use that question button and type in where you are listening from today? Okay, so we've got a lot of people listening in from all over New South Wales and several from outside of New South Wales. So just let the panelists know we've got people from Queensland, Victoria, Tasmania, ACT, South Australia, Western Australia, as well as all around Sydney and New South Wales. So that we are talking about the local court in New South Wales today, but the work of interpreters will be quite similar across different jurisdictions. But if there are special differences between states or territories, then we can talk about that as well. So it's amazing. We've got people from really across the country. So thank you all for joining us today. And I think most of you seem to be able to hear us. So hopefully the others who couldn't have managed to sort that out. We're also going to have a quick practice today. I'm actually also going to ask you to type in, so we can keep having a practice of the question panel, and type in what language or languages you interpret in, so we can get to know you a bit more. There are so many coming in, and I can see there's Arabic, Greek, Swahili, Tongan, Nepalese, Lao, Tamil, Auslan, Chinese, Khmer, really probably close to the 200 plus languages in the world. So thank you everyone for that. It's really interesting to know. I'm not going to read them all out, but it's most of the languages in the world. So thank you so much everyone. That is, and many people speak multiple languages, which we know interpreters are very skilled. So thank you so much. Okay, yeah. We're also going to do some polls now to get to know you a bit better just before we introduce the panel. So I'm just going to launch a poll today to find out, where have you mostly worked as an interpreter? So is it in courts and legal settings, or health services, education, non-government or business settings, or other? So I'll just give you a minute to answer that. So just give us a sense of where you most do your interpreting. So can you see there's a poll there, and some people are answering on the question panel as well. So thank you. Many people do work in courts already. So panelists, can you see that response? So 50% of people already work in court and legal settings, a lot of people in health, and also education, non-government, and other. So that's really interesting to know. So about half of people are mostly work in court and legal settings, and other people might not have so much experience in courts already. Just one further question to give us an idea of who's in our virtual room. We're just going to ask you about your NAATI certification level, just to give us an idea of where you sit there. I'll just launch that poll as well. So we're just asking, what is your NAATI certification? If you're certified specialist in health and legal, certified provisional, recognised, or if you're still studying, or if you're not an interpreter, you might be a bilingual practitioner, or just interested in the topic. Okay, thank you. I'll just stop that now and share the results with the panel and everyone. So we've got not that many people are specialists, and that's really good, because this webinar is for people who are maybe newer to interpreting in courts. So we've got a lot of certified interpreters and certified provisional interpreters, and also recognised practicing interpreters. So my understanding is that might be people who speak a language that NAATI doesn't have the testing for. Okay. All right, I'll just hide that. So hopefully that's useful for the panel to know who's in the room. And we do have a few more polls, but we might get the panel to introduce themselves first before we go. So we have on our panel, and I'll just explain to you who you can see, because there's someone on our panel that you can't see, and there's one camera angle on the panel which has one name but two people. So let me just clarify that for everyone. So my name is Natalie, so I'm from Legal Aid New South Wales. My name doesn't come up, it comes up as Legal Aid New South Wales, but I'm Natalie, so I'll be one of the facilitators today with Sam. So you heard from Sam today. We also have on the screen Her Honour Magistrate Daphne Cock. So welcome, we really appreciate your time today, and we really look forward to hearing your experiences and expertise around this. So I'm going to ask all the panelists to introduce themselves and a bit more of their background in a minute. So thank you. We also have on the screen with two people we have Alira Mori, who's the solicitor in charge of the Fairfield Legal Aid Office and also has a lot of experience working in domestic violence and the law in courts. So thanks, Alira. And sitting next to Alira is Registrar Fabienne Blancard from Fairfield Local Court. So thank you, Registrar. And you can also see on your screen Farah Asafiri, who is the coordinator of the Southwest Sydney Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service. So you can see on the screen there. And who you can't see on the screen is our interpreter. So I should say that we had an interpreter arranged for today, and unfortunately she was unwell and couldn't be here today. So we are very fortunate enough to have Sam Hobala, who was able to step in at the last minute. So thank you, Sam. If you want to just say hello so people can hear you.
Yeah, hello, Natalie. Hello, fellow panelists. I'm the invisible man today. Just a technical issue. I didn't know the camera doesn't work on mobile, but happy to be with you today as a professional interpreter.
Thank you, Sam. That's fantastic. All right. So that is our panel for today. So oops. Sorry about that. I'm just going to close the slides for now. So mostly today, you're just going to be seeing the panel, so without any slides. And if you can't see someone, again, remember, you might be able to select a function of who you can see on the screen. So hopefully you can hear us all today, and we will get going. Remember, if you have any questions, please type them into the question box. However, oh, somebody just made a joke, Sam, saying interpreters are invisible anyway, which is really interesting comment and a nice segue into the start of our panel. So, and yes, the audience are all muted today, so you can communicate with us by typing questions into the question panel, like we talked before about. As I've said, there are currently well over 300 people joining us today, which is great, but that might mean that some of your questions may not get answered. We might not get to all those questions today. However, we'd still encourage you to ask the questions because it's still really good for us to know what you're interested in, and that can help us for future training for interpreters. So please try and keep your questions short. And if you can direct who the question is to in the panel, that would be helpful. And
I just want to add, Natalie, sorry if I can say, I forgot to mention that my native language is Arabic, so I'm a professional Arabic interpreter. So if the people interested to know what language here.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of Arabic interpreters joining us today, as well as a lot of other languages. So we might get started, and I'm just going to ask you one more. I'll just do a bit more housekeeping. I know there's been lots of questions about NAATI points for this presentation, and as far as we know, you can claim some NAATI points. I think it's 10 points, and there will be a certificate attached to an email that you get at the end. So once we leave this webinar and I should also say that Sam interpreter needs to leave at 2 o'clock. So if this webinar does go beyond 2 o'clock, the other panel members can stay and we can keep answering questions, but Sam does need to leave at 2 o'clock. So once the webinar is finished, you will get an email and there will be a certificate attached to that email, so you can check with NAATI about the points. So we believe you can get points, but it will be up to you to check with NAATI. I'm just looking at some other questions. There's some definitely specific questions coming in already about interpreting in courts. So I think we might just get straight into it. Sam from Justice, did you have anything else to add before we?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we give like a very quick for the panel members to introduce themselves and where they work. And then we will start with one of the most important questions about COVID-19. So Magistrate, Your Honour, do you want to kick off that, please?
All right, thanks, Sam. I've been a magistrate since the 1990s. I was a solicitor before that. I've also been very involved with the University of Sydney and done things there, and I'm the chairman of the Law Extension Committee, which trains lawyers to practice in the Supreme Court and any other courts. I'm now retired officially, but I'm also acting at the moment as a magistrate, and so I still have some connections with the courts on a regular basis, except not during the COVID time, unfortunately. So I can't really help you on how it has been going as far as interpreting in that particular situation, although all the rules still apply, but I know that it would become quite difficult to get that close to people, and it is a bit of a problem. I can see that, and I'm sure there are various ways that it's being dealt with in different courts, but the first question every court has to do during COVID is be concerned about the safety of all members of the community and the court staff in particular. So when you start from that premise, I think you have to talk to the registrar about what's going to happen, or ask the judge about what's going to happen, particularly with, you know, getting very close up and personal with the whispering. So that's where I am.
Thanks, Your Honour. It's such a pleasure that you do this work with us and see significant in delivering those webinars to EPSCoL interpreters. Alera, I will hand it over to you, please.
I'll let the registrar go first. Sam?
Good morning, my name is Fabienne Blanca. I'm the Registrar at Fairfield Local Court. I've worked in local courts throughout New South Wales. Also, I'm responsible for making sure that we do all the interpreters for our cases going to court. But we'll talk more about that. I'm also bilingual in English and French language. I speak a little bit of German also. Thank you.
Thanks, Registrar. Alera?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having us today. So my name's Alera Mori, and I'm the solicitor in charge at the Fairfield Regional Office of Legal Aid. We've got solicitors in our office as part of the criminal law jurisdiction, civil law, and myself from a family law and domestic violence specialist background. So over the years, I've had a lot of experience working with clients and interpreters in a court setting, in particular here at Fairfield Local Court. So I'm really pleased to be with you today.
Thanks, Alera. Farah?
And good morning, everyone. That's really exciting to be part of this great panel and to be here. My name is Farah Safiri. I'm part of Southwest Sydney Legal Centre, and I manage Southwest Sydney Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service that covers Liverpool, Bankstown and Fairfield local courts. So I've been doing this for about 11 years now. Too long, but during that time as well, I had lots of interactions and conversations with clients and interpreters. My background is Arabic as well, and I speak, read and write Arabic, and it's really a pleasure to be able to be here today and share my experience and try hopefully to be helpful and beneficial.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Farah. And Sam, please.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Sam Hobarla. My background is in IT, but about 6 years ago I switched direction and I finished a master's degree in interpret translation. I am now certified interpret translator Arabic English. I love what I'm doing. I do mainly work in legal, courts, police and all that. In currently pursuing a postgraduate course research in legal interpreting at Western Sydney University. I love what I'm doing. I always had a passion for law and the legal issues, and happy to be with you today and like to be of any assistance or questions based on the experience I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Just for the sake of time, I think we will kick off with the first question to the registrar Fabienne, we know that over the news and everywhere, COVID-19 is the most hot topic now. Can you please tell us briefly some of the changes that local court has adopted to accommodate working with interpreters, and if there are any changes in the local court because of COVID-19, please?
Yes, and we had stages, various stages of the change. Initially, back in March, we had a type of a lockdown where the defendants and solicitors appeared either by email or audiovisual link, and the registry was closed to the public. We had a phone number and they couldn't ring the registry directly, and we would answer their questions, explain, you know, how to download forms on websites and things like that. Also, we cancelled all the hearings for March, April, May and June. We received 13 memorandum with directions from Judge Henson, and that's pretty significant because we had to change the way we dealt with our cases, what we did in court, how we made decisions about cases, and how the court will be operating. So it's been an ongoing process. For example, all persons in custody could only appear by audiovisual link, including those arrested at police stations. So police stations used audiovisual link. We also had to have a backup plan in case we did go into full lockdown, you know, working from home, but fortunately didn't eventuate. Also, when persons were arrested and they're issued a court attendance notice or yellow slip of paper, they were told to go to court in 3 months. Usually they're in court within about 3 weeks or so. And this included apprehended domestic violence orders, which is quite dramatic because usually we try and get them on as quickly as possible. But in saying that, you know, police have the powers to make provisional orders, so the victims were protected. Currently, we're in the process of relisting all those cancelled hearings and getting hearing dates. We're starting hearings for next week. So it's going to be a very different world. The solicitors have had to complete very detailed questionnaires to get ready for the hearings.
Fabienne, I'm sorry, Fabienne. I'm just going to interrupt because we've had some comments about there's a bit of echoing. So I might just ask other panelists to mute ourselves while you're talking. Okay. Maybe that will help. And Alira, if there's any way you can get the microphone a bit closer. We can try it. Sorry, Fabienne, I'll let you keep going.
Okay. Yeah, so now from the 11th of June, the solicitors and the defendants are expected to attend court. And defendants are allowed to be excused if they have a solicitor. So people can bring support persons. We're having face-to-face service now. We're back to that. You no longer need an appointment to get in the building. Like initially during the lockdown, you were only allowed in the building if you're a person coming to court or you had an appointment. That was the only way. The new thing that we've had recently is everyone's temperature's getting checked to get into the building. If your temperature's too high, you won't be allowed in the building. And they don't, you know, make any excuses, you know, even if the registrar of the local court has to have their temperature checked and, you know, if it's too high, I'm not allowed in the building. If that's serious, you know, the way we're dealing. So also we're back to the police bringing people in person in custody in the courts. But these days we do, even pre-COVID-19, we do most of our work through audiovisual link. As I said earlier on, our hearings are starting back next week. So we're getting back to normal. However, the change is physical distancing. So we have to stay 1.5. The other thing is throughout the COVID, there's, as you walk into the scanners, there's hand sanitizer for people to use. Throughout the building, there's stations with hand sanitizers. Throughout the building. Also, there's signage on the courtrooms. You can't have more than 7 people in the courtroom. The interview rooms are 2 people. So what we've done, we had to measure the size of all the rooms in the building and work out how many people are legally allowed, because it's health regulations and also directions from Judge Henson, our Chief Magistrate, about that. Also, anyone waiting in the foyer has to be physically distancing. Also, the other thing is the sheriff has to regularly monitor how many people in the building. So if we get too many people in the building, they might have to wait outside. Okay, getting the last bit very quickly. So throughout this, we've had interpreters coming to court, and we always ensure that the interpreter is 1.5 metres. So there's no chuchotage going on. And some interpreters, you know, they don't realise that, and you have to remind them you need to do 1.5 metres. Also in the courtrooms, we don't put, you know, the interpreters at risk. We make sure there's that physical distancing. Yes.
So, Registrar, I might just ask some questions that have come in. So just to clarify, I understand there is no chuchotage at the moment allowed. Are there courts implementing any other types of alternatives, like radio or interpreters being able to be at a safe distance but using technology?
I haven't been advised of that change.
Okay. There's quite a few questions we have around this COVID-19 situation, interpreting at this time. Firstly, if somebody is new to interpreting, and this is in our tip sheet. I should also say there's a handout attached to this webinar that has tips for interpreting in courts. One of the tips we give is that it's a good idea to observe court in action if you're not familiar yet with interpreting in courts. Is this something that's allowed for new interpreters at the moment?
Prior to COVID-19, yes, anyone could, you know, walk into a courtroom and sit down and you know, observe what was going on. But now, as I mentioned earlier, if you're not a party to the proceedings, so you're not the defendant or their solicitor, you won't be allowed in the courtroom. It's very strict. As I mentioned, there's only 7 people allowed in the courtroom. That includes the magistrates, the court staff, and anyone else who comes in the courtroom. They'll find when they walk in the courtroom, most of the chairs will have a sign, do not sit, you know, 1.5 distancing.
So observing might be something people can do once we're post-COVID, I guess, situation.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So we've got other questions about how interpreters are being engaged at this time, and there's some concern around interpreters needing to participate by phone at the moment, including for long, maybe a whole day by phone, which is difficult for them. Is that how interpreters are being engaged for court at the moment? Is it more by phone than face-to-face?
No, it's been face-to-face. They're being ordered. We've been ordered the interpreters, so it's been face-to-face, yes.
And there are concerns that people are asking in the questions around if chuchotage is not allowed, how does that impact people who need an interpreter being understood and to understand what's going on? Like, how is it working in practice?
We haven't really tested that out because, as I mentioned, we're not having the hearings until next week. We've only, if it's what is called a mention or a sentence matter, I don't see that as having been an issue.
Okay. And will interpreters be advised when they can go back to being able to be close together for chuchotage, that type of interpreting?
This is not up to the court. The government's passed health regulations, which we're bound to comply. So when the government passes legislation to revoke that, or the terms of the legislation enables that, then we'll be able to do it. It's not a decision by us.
And there's some comments coming through around the, I guess, necessity, the requirement of people who need an interpreter to be able to understand what's happening in court. So if chuchotage is not allowed, is this a breach of their human rights? And if somebody has complaints about this, what can they do? Could they write to the local court?
It's not a breach of human rights. I mean, it's a safety. You know, if you break the law and then you get COVID-19, you know, it's life and death we're talking about. So it's, you know, it's your life. So that's number one. You know, we've got to look after people's safety.
Can I say something on that?
Please.
We do. Yes, I think I've unmuted myself. I've muted myself. No, unmute. The court will obviously be concerned, the same as their representatives or the people themselves, if they can't hear what's going on. And I'll say something about this later. But two things on COVID, I think, that I've observed. One is when we get back to the stage where everybody can be allowed to do it by government regulation, it's not forbidden, I think people sometimes may still choose not to want to do it. And so I would think that any interpreter could say, I don't want to do that sort of interpreting. It might limit their options, but I think it'd be very fair if they said they didn't want to. The other thing is with anybody who's being denied the opportunity to hear exactly what is being said in a case where they're the defendant, for instance, then I think it's very important that they do know what's going on, and if necessary, all the things that are happening would have to be interpreted on the record. And that is an option. It'll slow the cases down at a time when we're going to be overloaded with cases. But if that cannot be done, then that will be the only way. But people do have a right to know exactly what is being said in court in their case. So I think there will need to be a bit of strategy worked around that. It may be that some people say they don't need every word interpreted, and the magistrate or judge will have to make a decision about whether that's on the level or not. But nobody, I think, will be forced to have their case heard without knowing what's happening, because it's in the rules that they're supposed to know. And I agree, it is a human rights question.
Thank you. Before we move on to general interpreting in court questions, there's one more COVID-19 related question, and that is, are masks allowed in court?
Well, I know magistrates don't like people wearing hats in court. I think it's up to the judicial officer, but there's certain behaviours that we engage to be respectful to the court.
Thank you.
Can I, sorry, Natalie, can I just say something? This is Farah. Because we actually contact all the referrals that come from police who attend the domestic violence incidents through a dashboard. So they send it through an electronic platform, and in Southwest Sydney, our team and we pick it up and contact the client. So our access to interpreters and our experience with them is both face-to-face before COVID-19 and now during COVID-19 as well, because we all are working remotely. So it moved more towards actually fully to be telephone interpreting. Before I say what I want to say, very quickly, responding to the gentleman or the lady who said that they are interpreters are invisible, I have to kindly disagree with that and to set the ground, lay it right. I think please take pride of the very, very and hugely important work that you do and the role that you play, because if I can speak on behalf of who's here and who's not here in my team as well, we are women advocates, and there's judges and magistrates, and there's people from justice, people from Centrelink, people, the court officers, the solicitors. We will be not able, it will be impossible for us to be able to support or assist or provide any of our duties actually, or fulfill our responsibilities if it's not because of the work that you do. It might be invisible, but it is such of an importance, and actually it goes as well for advocacy, where at the end of the day we all work together actually to support the client as smoothly as possible to ensure that they get the best outcomes from a client perspective and the fair treatment and the just treatment from the other person in the proceedings too. So just really take pride of the work you do, because you build rapport with clients who tell you the most secretive and private information in their life at such an emotional difficult time, such a tense time. That's from a victim perspective, and share with you really conversations that no one else would know about you. So it's really important the work you do. And the reason I'm starting with this is because as we talk, we might be talking about some challenges and what we suggest that works better than the usual practice. When we say that, it's not a negative that is attached to the role that we do, because we all work and driven by feedback. This is how we are able to actually implement changes. So using the phone with interpreters during COVID-19, we've always been like, you know, and like everything, so you've got the really great ones, and we've got, you know, other interpreters who are not comfortable or confident about certain topics. And because we do domestic and family violence all the time, it does involve sensitive conversations and very overwhelming conversations as well. Some of it might be actually clashing with the interpreters or the other person's values or ethics in terms of whether they agree or disagree. And what's such a hard job actually to be very professional when it comes to the value conflict, actually, when we believe in something, but we have to interpret what's been happening. So over the phone during COVID-19, what we found, there's some you know, smooth conversations that took place, but the difference was that because everybody was remotely working from home, the conversations were needed sometimes to be cut shorter, back-to-back actually commitments for some interpreters, for some languages where they have a list of jobs that they needed to attend to, which we found as well, not us as workers, and from a client perspective, a bit distracted with conversation. Doing an intake with the client and trying to explain AVO conditions and doing safety could take up to 45 to 50 minutes, which is sometimes has been requested to be cut short because of back-to-back actually other duties that they have to attend to. And given that everybody's working from home, there's been situations where we were again, like, you know, people were doing other stuff while they are interpreting. We can hear some noise in the background. However, it's been working, and actually everybody had worked to the best of their capacity and ability, and actually there hasn't been delays. We've had great experiences with with interpreters over the phone, and there has been some challenges in terms of, as I said, this distraction in the background, having to attend to children, having to attend to other jobs, etc. Sorry, I talk too much, but thanks. I just want to start this conversation on that note.
No, that's fine. We might do one quick poll again just to check that everyone's still awake and still here. And we want to know, I guess, what types of matters you do in courts, just to get the sense of what your experience is. So do you mostly work in criminal cases in the local court, or AVO matters like Farah was talking about, or civil or family law matters? Okay, I'm just going to share that quickly. So it looks like there's a pretty big spread of all different types of matters, and 41% of people work in family law matters, which is really interesting for us to know. Today, we're talking mostly about the local court, but it might be that we can do something more specialized for family law and tribunals at another time. So that's really useful for us to know. So thank you for that. We've got one more. I'm just going to ask you one more quick poll question before we ask Harana to talk about her experiences. So this is about why do you think interpreting in courts can be challenging? Is it because courts are intimidating and formal, which maybe if you're new to interpreting, you might find that, or interpreters are not provided with enough information? Courts don't recognize cultural differences in language, which we'll talk a little bit about, and legal jargon is complicated. It's difficult to voice concerns during court about problems. Okay, I'm just going to close that and share it with the panel. So this is really interesting, and we're going to talk a bit about in a minute how interpreters can get more information before a matter. 30% say courts are intimidating and formal, and we're going to try and virtually go to a court in a minute. And also legal jargon can be complicated, and that's definitely true. So thank you for that. That's really interesting for us to know in advance. people have also just wanted to make clear that if they say an interpreter is invisible, that's a good thing, because that means that they're doing their job seamlessly and well. It doesn't mean that they're not valued. It means that they're doing a great job. So a few people just wanted to know that that's how they felt. Okay. Before we talk about the local court kind of setup and where people are and what's what in the local court, in a courtroom, I'm going to ask Her Honour Magistrate Cock to give your view on what judicial officers expect from interpreters. And we had quite a few questions in advance around that kind of thing. What do you expect from interpreters in your career? Thank you.
Well, I would say that what we can expect these days and what magistrates are supposed themselves to expect is quite different from what our training prior to when I went on the bench had anything to do with. At law school, all through the work you do before you get to be a magistrate, there wasn't much training about how to interface with interpreters. What we now have is a total change. I started off on the local court education committee years ago saying, who's had matters with interpreters? And everybody did, but they all had different ideas about what you had to do with them and how you had to manage the situation. Excuse me. There was no formal training. And, you know, you're supposed to know everything about court once you're appointed, but you don't. And you don't even know what a registrar does, I mean, you know, unless you came up through the court system. So it's really different. And what I did for the Education Committee, and it was so well received in the local court that we did it for a whole lot of other legal bodies as well, was I wrote a little play and we used interpreters as all the people in the court, and we used one of the judges or magistrates or somebody else as the defendant in a domestic violence matter. And it went really well. We had some really good people who got into it, but the Vietnamese interpreters who came along and worked with me helped me understand what they were walking into in a court, and having one of our judges as the defendant and the only person in court that didn't speak Vietnamese, theoretically, was an eye-opener for all the magistrates and judges all over the country. And we did some at the, interstate training as well, because they hadn't had any specific guidance bringing their attention to what it was like for a person who goes into a courtroom where everybody speaks a different language from them, and having to be made aware of everything that is happening, what their vulnerability is, who they can expect to help them, and where everybody is. Over the years, some people have done, we found out all the problems, all the things that are in all your questions have come up at some stage in our exercise doing that. And this was a very amateurish way to go about research, but it was the only way we had. Later, there were fantastic explorations by really skilled people investigating what the role of an interpreter should be and what it was, how people should interface with them, how it should all happen. And now, with all of that research having been done, and I think she might be in the audience, and if she is, I have to say I do very much appreciate the work Professor Sandra Hale did on all of that. A fantastic report, and everything that was in that is now part of what is routinely made available to magistrates. There are bench books. I know that they don't all read them, not every word. They have a lot of other things to do too. But the Judicial Commission of New South Wales issues bench books with the help of the Education Committee of the local court, or in the case of the Equality Before the Law bench book, it is all of the courts. And these bench books are used as tools every day. The local court bench book has all sorts of stuff about all the things people are charged with and what the penalties are and so on, about how to deal with people if you're going to put them in prison, all sorts of things. But the one that deals with people from different backgrounds is called the Equality Before the Law bench book, and it's been issued by the Judicial Commission of New South Wales, and you can look it up and you can actually read it. The first thing you can do is go to the internet and look up the Judicial Commission of New South Wales. Then you go from there. It's open to the public. You don't have to be a lawyer or a judicial officer to access it. And you can get to that. And it's actually got a formal name, but if you just look up Judicial Commission of New South Wales, you'll get all the stuff you need. Go to publications, bench books, Equality Before the Law. And then you'll find there's this amazing book which has in it, well, I've got the index here somewhere. It's all about, well, a couple of the specific chapters. One's about Aboriginal people. One is, and this is number 3, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. That's what that whole chapter is. It is fantastic. It also has another one on people with disabilities. In fact, I found when I went through the people with disabilities chapter that they had an interesting one that they were suggesting you could do, and I thought you'd really like to know about this. They were talking about the need for breaks and adjournments for people in court and that sort of thing. And they said some people with disabilities and or their carers, support people or interpreters or guide dogs may need help. Now, I don't put interpreters in the category of guide dogs, but they are very, very important for people who come to court, whether they are disabled or whether they're not. And a lot of the things that come up in interpreting for the people you're interpreting so they will understand are things which the courts are supposed to observe anyway. So when you say, for instance, why don't they speak slowly? Why don't they speak so people can understand the questions? Those are rules which the court is supposed to enforce anyway, whether it's via interpreters, whether it's for just Aboriginal people, whether it's for people from any different language. Those are fundamental. If they've got some intellectual disability, they still need to understand if they come to court what's going on. So that is one of the most fundamental things the court needs to know, that everybody understands what's happening. And from that point of view, that's what's there. If you have a look at the bench book called Equality Before the Law, and you go to chapter 3, you will find all the stuff about working with interpreters and what problems interpreters have and what magistrates and judges should be doing about it, and all the reasons, and in fact, all the information about how we decide whether we need an interpreter. It's almost every time the person says they need one, because a lot of people speak English very well in conversation or at work, but they can't really cope with the nuances when they're in a courtroom, stressed, as everybody gets stressed if they're a witness. I've been a witness in the Supreme Court and it was scary as anything. You get totally disoriented. So it happens to everybody. And just be aware that that information is there, and magistrates now technically have that education, which they didn't used to have. And it is all directed to the same questions that most of you people have raised in your questions before this seminar.
Thank you, Your Honour. And there's an email people will get an hour after the webinar, so we can include a link to that bench book. Now, I'm just going to mention that a few people have commented that there are now some national recommended standards for interpreters
That's right.
working courts, and we are aware of that on this panel. But I guess the purpose of this panel was for interpreters to basically hear from the mouth of a magistrate, registrar, interpreter and lawyer today about their experiences. So we are aware of those national recommended standards, but we're not specifically talking to those standards today. Did anyone want to comment on those? Or should we move on to the next question?
Well,
I'm just aware that, sorry.
The courts are pretty much bound by those with all of the things that have now been put in place for the courts. So you can pretty well assume that in most courts in Australia, those recommended standards have been substantially adopted. They've not become necessarily always totally laid down as law, but they are certainly very much the recommended standards.
Thank you. And yeah, so we'll put a link to the bench book in the email as well. I just wanted to make sure that we give enough time to Sam, our interpreter, who has to leave at 2 o'clock for another assignment. So I might go to a question for you now, Sam.
Yes.
So as an experienced interpreter, I guess there's a few things we want to hear from you. Firstly, what advice would you give to people just starting out to interpret in court settings? Is there any lessons that you've learned along the way that you would say to new interpreters, and also any, I guess, practical tips, I suppose, for interpreters working in court settings? We've got a few more questions further on, but if you can give an overview about any tips, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, look, yeah, thanks for the question, Natalie. The court setting or interpreting court, the first thing, it's not as scary as it sounds. Look, new interpreters go there and they are like warned, it's very formal, people are there like scary, very intimidating. My experience is not this. I found that judges, magistrates, and the other legal professionals and other participants are very friendly with the interpreters. They appreciate and they cooperate. So my advice, go there with pride as a professional. You need, like you are a professional like any other in the court, the courts like participants. So go there with pride and ask questions about the case if you can before the case. Ask like you found that other lawyers, participants can cooperate to help you. Obviously, preparation is very important. If you know about like what kind of court you are attending, is it family, is it commercial, what kind of court, and the case, what kind of case, and make the preparation. Study, for example, there's a lot of information there about cases like that. Once if you study, you know the case you are attending, you do the preparation, glossaries, study similar cases. The preparation, go there with confidence. Don't be scared. You'll find the people there are much more friendly than you expect. You know, they will help you. And I find, unlike I was told before I start, there's high respect for interpreters. People appreciate their role a lot because they know the court hearing, whatever, couldn't happen without interpreters. So you go there, you know that your role is essential, crucial. You need to act as a professional, so people treat you like a professional. So in brief, I would say, look, you do the preparation, make sure you are when I found that when you are stressed or anxious or something, it affects a lot your performance as an interpreter. Go there, when you do the preparation, you know you're professional, you are high respected, you go there with pride, so you need to be relaxed there. And you act professionally. You need to be aware. The other thing important, you need to study and be aware of the OSIT Code of Ethics and Code of Conduct. It's very important. That's very important, God, to know what is right, what can be done, what can be done. So having that those things, preparation, awareness of the court, have pride of what you are doing, and you are professional like any other one, and you strive to do your job properly because people need you, whether the court or the participants, defendant. So you need to do your job as best as you can, and you find it not as intimidating, as difficult as you may think.
Thank you, Sam. And we've had questions specifically around, are interpreters an officer of the court, and what does that mean? Do you want to?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Look, when people participate in the court, including the interpreter, are officers of the court in the sense, like it may be a bit or may sound a bit confusing. Well, I'm employed by this agency, they pay me. Why I should is responsible, accountable to the court? Well, you are accountable to the court because the court rely on your skills, in your professional, your qualification. So you are accountable to the court in the way to conduct yourself to the standards required by the court. So in obviously the outcome of the court could a lot depend on in your interpreting. So while you are employed and paid by somebody else, while you are interpreting court, you are an officer of the court, you are responsible professional before the judge in the court.
Thank you.
If that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. And there's a few, I guess, practical questions that we've had from people about how do you manage when, I guess, either lawyers or a witness is talking too fast or saying words that you don't understand or can't interpret. How do you manage that type of thing in court, or cross-examination if people are getting emotional? So as an interpreter, how do you handle that?
Well, that's right. The two things, it happens often, especially the defendant or the witness, to speak in very long segments. And because they're emotional, they don't have experience, and they talk in long segments. Normally, you would ask the judge or the magistrate, permission to please remind the speaker to speak in, they can speak as many details as they want, but please save them in short segments so I can interpret accurately. Accuracy in any kind of interpreting, especially in court, is very important. So you are reminding people to speak through the judge, to speak in short segments, to be able to remind them about you having to do the job properly to interpret accurately. So you've got, you can always raise your hand or something to ask for permission. The other point is if people say, okay, if the lawyer, the barrister, or even the judge say a word that you don't understand, which happens often because legal jargon, it's like no matter how much you learn, there will be some words that you don't know. So some people suggest you can ask the permission from the judge to look for the dictionary. Look, some people do that. I don't favor that option from my experience. The better option, I don't have the option because if you want to look for the word in dictionary, it will take time. It doesn't look good. It's not very productive. So the better option is to please ask the permission from the judge for the speaker to say, or the judge himself, to rephrase that. There will be another way to say that without that particular word. So they will rephrase or paraphrase in a way that does not alter the meaning and will make it easier for you. That's the way I do, and it always works. If it doesn't happen often, as a professional interpreter, to have a word you don't understand. But it does happen. I would ask the speaker, take permission from the judge or the magistrate to please ask the speaker to rephrase that. And the other thing I noticed, to my fellow interpreters, you find magistrates and judges in the QCs, they are very cooperative, very friendly, much more than you think. They appreciate your role, and they are there if you ask for support or anything to help you your job professionally. They are very helpful. They are not there to get you, so don't go there scared. My experience with the judges is really excellent. They are obviously they help. The other good thing is in this regard, they're becoming more awareness of the role of the interpreter. Maybe, I don't know how was that 20, 30 years ago, but I think there's becoming increasing awareness about the role interpreter by legal professionals in the lab. So that makes it easier for us interpreters that they know the challenges we go to, and then we ask for support or clarification. They're always there to understand, and they're not going to criticize you for that. The other thing's important one, I would say, never guess or make assumption. You know, legal interpreting is too important to do that. If something is not clear to you, don't make assumption. Never. Better to ask. Nobody will criticize you for asking for clarification, but if you make assumption or guess, it should never do that. So that's what my experience for the sake your guide, that's in line with the code of ethics and the code of conduct. Your primary goal is accuracy in interpreting. You must, because the outcome of the case may a lot depend on how you interpret. So you need to remember to stick to that accuracy principle and make sure at all times interpret accurately. And if you do make a mistake, you can always seek permission from the judge. That's Your Honor, there was some misinterpreting or something. Can I correct that? So always accuracy should be paramount. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And a lot of people have commented that, yes, you are giving excellent advice. Just to clarify, if a witness is talking on for too long and you need them to stop, does that request have to go through the magistrate or the judge?
Definitely. All the communications in a courtroom should go through the judge. He's the presiding professional, this one. So say as a speaker is talking for long segments or something not clear, you don't talk to them directly, because the judge and the other participants need to remember participants in the room, they need to be present linguistically, which means you can't say, if you're talking in Arabic, you talk to the speaker, can you in Arabic speak shorter segments, because that's not allowed. You know, the judge and the other people in the room need to know what's happening. So that's why, and you remember always, the judge is the presiding professional, so it has to go through him or her. You ask, I'm speaking as interpreter. Can I have your permission to ask him to talk in short segments, so to clarify that? So it has to go through the judge, yes.
Definitely,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think that's really clear. And we've also got a handout you can see attached to this webinar. And there's also a link in the email you get, which is called Tips for Interpreting Effectively in Courts, which is just a draft that we are starting to put together. And that has those practical tips in there as well, about even including the wording. You can say, this is the interpreter speaking, Your Honor, can you please ask? So that kind of thing. So people are asking.
Yes.
Yeah. So the tips are largely drawn from the AUSIT Code of Conduct and Code of Ethics that we mentioned before. And
can I just say, there are some non-verbal ways that you might sometimes communicate with the magistrate, simply by rolling your eyes when it's going for too long, or a little hand gesture asking someone to slow down, where that's already been mentioned before, just to sort of make it all quicker. Sometimes people just put their hand up and that's enough words. Without saying that's enough words, they just do that, and the person stops and they then go ahead. You know, each court has its own ways of communicating, and often the judge knows exactly what's going on, with the interpreter being absolutely overwhelmed with the rush. And everybody else in the courtroom might have the same problem, because we're supposed to be taking notes of what someone's saying while it's happening. And if they go too fast and too long, you just don't get it all down unless you do really good shorthand.
Thank you,
all
Your
understand.
Yeah. So just going through some of these questions that we've been getting in. Just from Your Honour's perspective, I know this is what Sam has said as well, but how do you feel as judicial officer about having something asked to be rephrased or repeated if people don't understand? And what do you think is the best way to do this?
Well, I think that the interpreter, if they have a problem ever, should always immediately bring it to the attention of the magistrate or the judge, and it may be before a jury too. If it's in the district court or something, you're going to have to make sure that you can faithfully do all the interpreting. So if you have any problem at all, just ask the presiding judicial officer, whoever it is, if they could help you with this particular issue. And they often will already be thinking the same thing anyway.
So I might ask, this has been touched on as well around accuracy. I think Sam mentioned accuracy is really critical, accuracy in interpreting. Does anyone, maybe I'll ask Alira first, if you've had any experiences in court where you've seen the consequences of something being interpreted inaccurately, perhaps?
Thanks, Natalie. I guess the work that we've done with interpreters has been just absolutely amazing. And to echo what a few people have already said, you know, that we couldn't do our job without fantastic interpreters. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. I think if somebody picks up maybe that something wasn't quite accurate, or if circumstances, sometimes we have a client who does speak English but would feel more comfortable having the interpreter in the courtroom. And then if the client may not think that what was interpreted to them was actually what they did hear and understand in English, sometimes we've had those kind of queries. I think if there's any concerns about inaccuracies, whoever hears those inaccuracies, just raise it either with the lawyer or a court officer or registrar, and look at what we need to do from there, particularly if the case, you know, really hinges on something that might have been said. So don't be afraid to raise that issue, and you know, as I understand it, to talk to your supervisors around, you know, if you think that this has been an issue in court. I'm not sure if that answers the question, Nat. That was what.
There's just one other thing about that is an interpreter who happens to be in the courtroom while somebody else is interpreting. I wouldn't do too much directly at that moment with the judge. You shouldn't intervene in some other court case. If you have other concerns, what you've said, talk to the lawyers or anybody else. But then if you do raise a question about which gives you a competition between two interpreters, don't expect the judge in that case to make the decision, because that would be setting you up as an expert witness, and it'd all have to be recorded and all the arguments about it, and it could be a big sort of flop for everybody. So try and be discreet if you're just feeling critical about other interpreters, but don't let them completely go if you think they're dangerous.
Yeah.
So this is a related question, Your Honour, around somebody suggested that sometimes there might be inexperienced magistrates who think of interpreting needs to be literal or every word needs to be interpreted, but sometimes the language doesn't quite lend to that. So what's a way for interpreters themselves to politely talk to the magistrate about how it works? Well, Sam,
you could say that it says in the bench book at page such and such that you're supposed to do it this way. I mean, sometimes there's no polite way to tell people they don't know what they're talking about, but obviously if you can find the right words to do it in a better way, you could. And sometimes you could say, look, I'm concerned that there might be some misunderstandings here. And perhaps Your Honour would like to say, you know, what else we should do about this, that or the other. And if you're really worried that you're not getting through to them, maybe talk to the court officer about what the usual practice is in that court and see if it's a problem or not, and tell the registrar what happened. Fabienne will love that. But,
Hello, Natalie.
you know.
Yes,
Mhm.
Sam?
Yes, just a quick, if I can, I'm not interrupting anyone. Just an example about how interpreting can go wrong. Can I give an example?
Please.
Yeah.
Mm.
I've got here from a police interview that I did transcription, like in listening. I tell you what the investigator said. We're telling the lady that being interviewed, we had one piece of paper about some concerns about, say, John. We had one piece of paper about some concerns about John. And the interpreter said, somehow, you know, what happened? The interpreter said, we had a single piece of paper with things you mentioned about John. And the lady, I listened to that, it's about 2-hour interview, and the lady said, what did I say about John? So the police investigator was saying, we have some concerns about, you know, what's a doctor? Concerns about a doctor. And then the interpreter came, things you mentioned about the doctor. And she thought that she said something bad. It's completely, you see, the investigator or the detective was very careful with his language. It has to be interpreted exactly what he said, you know. So this is can be an example how can be what's called distorted interpreting. It can lead to a completely different direction. You know, I've got many examples like this, but that's just like thought to mention for my fellow new interpreters about how can distorted interpreting can cause really undesired consequences, obviously.
Can I just say that sort of thing happens whether we've got interpreters or not. People misunderstand what questions have been asked to someone and what their answer was, even in court, and then they try to cross-examine them on their answers, and you find that they have totally misunderstood what was going on between English speakers who just and that they hadn't listened to the question or the answer properly. This happens all the time with any interaction between human beings, that they misunderstand what the other person is saying to them. And yes, we have to be careful about that. And sometimes that has to be corrected. But, you know, sometimes I have to admonish senior barristers because they didn't listen to the question. It happens.
There's a couple of questions that have come through, well, probably hundreds of questions that have come through, so we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But some people are interested, I think, in the situation that arises when family members of people start to try and interpret in court, and there is an interpreter there, but maybe another party, there's a family member that's interpreting. How do interpreters deal with this?
You have to answer this?
Yes, please. Thanks, Sam.
You see, yeah, from my experience with respect, when family members try to interpret, they can do more bad than good with respect to them. Okay. And normally, no, I would say, please, I am here, my job to interpret. That's why I'm here, and I've got the qualification that so let me, I will interpret. And please, I can't share the interpreting. I can't share the interpreter with somebody else. I find, believe me or not, in many cases happen this. I do it obviously politely before this, before the case. If it's inside, it's different. But before we start, I'll say I'm the interpreter. But I find that those parents, they think they want to help their family. When they listen to a professional interpreter, they come later and say, you did a much better job than we would do, because that's our job. We are trained to do that. So they appreciate the fact that they didn't interpret. So you need to explain to them that that's your job. You are bound by ethics, by code. You are trained in all that. So, and you do the right thing. That's your professional interpreter, and you do the right thing. And, you respect their skills, whatever they care about relatives. But that's my job. And normally they respect that and actually appreciate after that. So yeah, I wouldn't let a family member, whether it's court or medical or something, to interpret in the presence of a professional interpreter.
And that kind of leads to a related question that we've had around the interpreter's role in explaining cultural differences. So does sometimes a magistrate or the lawyer, if they are trying to rely on an interpreter to explain a cultural difference or something like that, how would you handle that?
Yes, that's right. If there's something, it has to be really important. You don't want to to interrupt the court for something minor. It has to be really a key issue, important issue that you need to explain. And you ask the interpreter, may Your Honor, can I ask your permission to clear something, a cultural thing? You can do that, yes. And then obviously the decision at the end, it's the presiding judge or magistrate. They decide whether this is of value or not. But your job is just to draw the attention to this, that this could be an issue, the culture. For example, for an Arabic speaker, can I give an example?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So, for example, for an Arabic speaker or like at the court, for them to have, for example, the wife or something, say cheating or something, to them. If was this in maybe Arab country court, this would be treated like a crime to that person. It's a crime. While here, well, it's not moral, it's not ethical, but it's not a crime, So the man is speaking as if this is a crime, but by the legal system, it's not a crime. This is an example. I'm not sure we can clarify or not, but when I'm interpreting, I had a number of cases like this. Inside me, I know that this person is talking, wants to convince the judge that his partner committed a crime. Well, but legally, it's not a crime, here in Australia, there's a legal system. So that's the difference in culture, how we can view things different between culture to culture. In our countries as well, normally after divorce, the kids go often with the man. While here, the whatever best of the kids. So there are differences in I don't know, at least in our culture, Arabic, I think somehow they need, that's a separate issue, people from Arab background need to have some awareness about the legal system in Australia. They need about how the system works here, because people go to court, they have no idea about the legal system, how the laws here. It then sometimes makes harder for us interpreters to because there are a way to understand what I'm telling them, what the judge is telling them. That's another issue, but that's an example about the cultural difference between here and other countries. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And Alira and Farah also want to comment about this, because it must be something that does come up quite a lot in courts. So, Alira, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Nellie. And yeah, Sam, I mean, it does come up quite often. And I guess what I'd say, it sort of dovetails in terms of the role of the lawyer in court and dealing with clients. I think, firstly, if you're a legal aid lawyer or you're a private lawyer and you're here on a really busy day at court and you discover that your client needs an interpreter and the magistrate's churning through matters and you've got to get them on really quickly, often you'll find that lawyers might seem very rushed, and as soon as they find out who the interpreter is and they grab you into that interview room, they'll launch straight into mid-conversation and expect you to interpret. So I think firstly, in terms of your interactions with a lawyer and client in that first instance, certainly what I used to always do is bring the interpreter in, explain who I am and my name, and explain some context, really brief context of what that legal matter is about, the role of the client in these proceedings, and what it's in court for today, so that you've got a little bit of context. And also that the lawyer should be speaking in plain English. There's nothing wrong with you as an interpreter to do the reverse of that, or as soon as you're brought into an interview room with a lawyer, you could introduce yourself, your name, who you are, ask for some brief context, and ask what it's in court for today and the role of the party. That slows the lawyer down and gives you an opportunity to get a better understanding. Then as part of that, on this topic that we were just talking about now, that if there's some cross-cultural differences in what might be crimes in other countries, what might not be crimes in other countries, but it now is a crime here, and that's what's being dealt with at court. I think in the context of domestic and family violence matters, I certainly over the years have heard sort of many examples where, you know, the defendant in the proceedings might have said, I'm going to kill her, but tried to dismiss that or minimise that violence by sort of saying, oh, it doesn't mean I'm literally going to kill her. It means something different in my language or in my culture. So I think what we just need to be really careful about is, if that's what the client is saying, then of course you need to interpret that. But I think it's really important then for the lawyer or the, you know, WWCAS advocate, or certainly I would imagine then when it reaches a registrar or a magistrate, that minimising violence is not something that's acceptable, and that violence, domestic violence, is actually a crime in New South Wales, and that the courts take this really seriously, you know. So I just think in terms of that cross-cultural stuff that might be happening, or differences of interpretation from the client's perspective about what you know they claim to be have said, I just think we need to be really careful on that. And Farah, you might want to comment somewhere there too.
Well, what I want to say is about the cross-cultural misunderstandings. Like, it could be anything we can think of that has different meanings in two cultures. Could be anything, could be the language, a term. And I can talk from like the Arabic. Arabic is it's like an ocean, this language, it's massive. However, there are brilliant actually interpreters who can speak different dialects. So in Arabic, there are different dialects that come from different countries, or even sometimes from one country, between the north and the south. There's different as well dialects, and there are really great specialties that gets you know, within these dialects and interpretation. So sometimes, and it's my experiences, for example, a word that can be, say, normal in one dialect in Arabic could mean, for example, a swear word in a different dialect for a different country. So as I said, overall, I've experienced brilliant interpreters who are able to understand and deliver very clear exchange of this information and relaying all the information smoothly between different dialects. However, I have seen situations where other clients would request specific dialect, or sometimes the challenge is with the interpreter who's there, that actually find it a bit challenging to understand or put across the message or the interpretation clear, you know, between the, for example, the solicitor, police, prosecutor, the worker and the client to the magistrate. So I will suggest as well, and definitely you know, Fabienne and Your Honor, Alira, you can comment on that, that it's really important, as Alira said, that you introduce yourself and may in the context of talking, because it is your right to be comfortable as well in the job that you're doing, in order to be seamless in the interpreting that you're doing, and fulfilling the invisible sort of feeling of completing a perfect work. And a great work, as mostly done, is to identify this challenge early on, and potentially if there's some challenges with understanding that dialect, or just to say it to the court officer, or relay it to the actually, so the magistrate can be aware, and the registrar, because and Fabienne, you would be able as well to talk about that. It might be better and more appropriate for the sake of all the parties to get someone who speaks that specific dialect. It could be very challenging at times, and it could delay as well you know, the proceedings. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go back to Sam for 5 minutes because he does have to leave. And there's 2 important things I want you to cover, Sam, before you need
Yes,
to head
sure.
off.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
so the final thing I want you to end on is around interpreters looking after themselves. So interpreters going to the local court or any court might come across difficult situations, traumatic situations, and need to interpret the
Yes.
things that go on in court. So how do you look after yourself and what's available to help interpreters? And also some specifics around words used. So if there's either multiple words in one language and no direct translation in English, like how do you manage that kind of situation? So if you could cover those 2 kind of issues, I think that would be useful. Or if there's any final words you have yourself before leaving.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Help for interpreters subjected to the topics they go through. I don't see there's much help for interpreters. It can get you sometimes. You attend difficult cases. What I do, the problem with this is all confidential. There's not much you can talk about the case or something. You said that we had a difficult case, but obviously you can't go into details. But what I do is I talk to a friend or family. I found this is the best. I like family or friend. If I talk to them, that's every one of us is different how they can. But in terms of that helps me. But in terms of organizations or professionals to debrief you, support, I don't find this much support for this. So we need. I always remind myself, I'm a professional. That's my job. No matter how hard it is for me, you can imagine how hard it was for the people involved in that. I'm just a witness. This one is so hard. So it's nothing compared to the people who actually went through that. So yes, talking to friends, family, to me helps.
Sorry to interrupt. We've also heard, sorry to interrupt. We've also heard if people from Multicultural New South Wales, if you're on that panel, you can access their employee assistance plan to talk to counsellors, or people can go to a GP if they need to get a plan to talk to a counsellor. And I know even lawyers in court, we need sometimes to debrief about cases. So it's not about disclosing the details or names. It's just about talking about how it feels for you. So I think there is some professional support available. I've also included a link in the email you get for 1-800-RESPECT has a page for professionals. So there are some links that we will provide you there.
Okay, so, thank you. Look, yeah, I haven't done work for Multicultural New South Wales yet, so I don't know. But from the people I work with, I don't know. I haven't talking to GGP or referral to a psychologist if really obviously helps in any situation like this. Yeah, but look, from my experience,
people are saying that TIS also has an employee assistance program. So I think it's about talking to your agency.
You know what? Look, you reminded me now. I went to a trip in Nauru in late 2016 with TIS Home Affairs. And yes, there, maybe you reminded me, we had a good employment assistance program from the TIS staff. It was really good because there you go through a lot of difficult cases. You can imagine Nauru, the refugees. So you attend really difficult cases, people going through traumas. So I had that. Was there about 8 weeks. That was really good. Yes, the help or the counseling we were getting assistance with this case was good. But while in Australia, I haven't, I don't know, look, maybe I didn't ask, maybe, but there may be, as you said, obviously there will be some help. I haven't asked, and so yeah, I found family and friends is help. Found it of help to me. As I said before, everyone is different, but thank you for reminding us all about the other organizations. About the different words, this is a very good question, actually. Yes, knowing the 2 languages, say I can talk about languages. I know Arabic and English. Yes, there are a lot of synonyms of words, but they can be different. So as interpreters, we can't exchange. Like, you need to use the right word for the right place. I can give if you have 2-3 examples here about words. They can be. You need to use. Let me see on my computer here. Sorry, I won't be a second. Okay, I'll give some examples. Is that all right? About here. For example, the words that can be repeated. We use the words duress, coercion, compelling, forcing. Those words are synonyms, but they are not the same. So you really, comes about to language fluency. You need, it comes with experience, and again, experience, and you need to always improve your vocabulary. Interpreters, listening to legal dialogues on like radio stations or read on the internet for cases. When you read the glossaries, you know the word, but unless you use that word, unless you listen to it and use it, you can't use it. So using the words the right way to know to use the right word in the right context. So looking at materials, listening to dialogues in legal context, help you. It comes with time. I feel this is improving all the time with me to be able to know all the synonyms of one word, in which one is the right one to use, because it doesn't always like the synonyms, we can use any one. For example, when you say interrogation, investigation, questioning, examination, interview, they're all synonyms, but they're not the same. And they can alter the meaning, words like alter, change, modify, amend, edit, update, they're all about the same, but everyone fits in one particular context in some meaning. So I think more need to be done in education, training of interpreters about these words like synonyms and the difference in how they're used. So yeah, using the right word in the right context of the group of words that have the same meaning is very important. So yes, it comes with experience. Maybe more in my research, I'm going to talk about this, put more emphasis on training interpreters about this, like the words that have the same group of words with the same meaning, but they have different meaning in every context. So yeah, it's important for the sake of the accuracy to do that. Sorry, if I can mention one thing more, about the accuracy. Accuracy, it has a lot of different meaning for different scholars or different research. So what is agreed now is a pragmatic, the equivalent of one language to another language, it have the same impact that what the original message would have done. So when I say accuracy, we need to be careful about what accuracy means. Well, that's another issue.
Sam, we're going to have to let you, well, you're going to have to go because you have another assignment at 2 o'clock. But thank you so much.
I have to go now. Thank you, Adele.
Yeah, thank you for your contribution.
Thank you, Natalie. It's a pleasure being with you guys, everyone. Thank you. Hope to participate in another activity again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think Sam has a lot to contribute and a lot of interesting things to say, and it might be that we need to do another panel like this later to hear more about his research. I know that, Fabienne, did you want to talk more about the words used in court? And sorry, before you do, we've had some questions about how people can learn about legal jargon. And I think there is a lot of complicated words and unique words used in the law. In the email that you will be getting after this webinar, there'll be a link to another webinar on legal words in criminal law settings. So we're running that next month with an experienced criminal lawyer. So that will be our opportunity to talk about specific legal words. So we're not going to go into the jargon or legal words today, but there'll be opportunities for that. So Fabienne, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
I don't think an interpreter can underestimate their value by what Sam was talking about. And with local courts, we have a lot of domestic violence matters. And when someone comes to court, there's an application for domestic violence order. Also, in a lot of cases, they've been charged with assaulting people, injuring somebody. So if you think you're going to work in the local court and you have, an assault matter, you need to look up all the words in English like slap, push, hit, punch, grab, what those would be, the equivalent in the language you're going to interpret. And sorry?
The important one is choke.
Choke, sorry, yes, choke. Because when the magistrate is deciding what sentence to give the person, what punishment, what word you have translated can make the difference between someone getting a fine or imprisonment, and that's how serious it is. So you can't guess. So you need to have that range of vocabulary. And if there's not an equivalent in the language, like in the language, if there's one word that means 10 words, I would encourage you to let the magistrate know, because the magistrate may ask further questions, you know, or ask the solicitor or the police to ask further questions about what actually happened.
Yeah.
Thanks, Vivienne. Your Honour, did you have something to add to that, or otherwise I'm just going to ask Farah to comment.
I think I interrupted her, which was a bit mean, but choking is very, very interesting at the moment, because they couldn't get convictions for people actually choking people, and I wondered why they never actually said that was what they were being charged with, because it's such an extended form of assault. But it was because they couldn't get convictions that they've amended the actual offence to make it a lot easier for the police to prove that somebody was choking. There are things like that where we've got escalations of different offences, and I think when you do the criminal one, I think that'll be good, because I think people are concerned about whether it's an assault, whether it's an assault with actual bodily harm, whether it leads to death and things like that. So those are different charges, and people will have to understand that when they're interpreting too. So somebody asked a question somewhere about whether you could have the charge or something explained. Well, it's very important from the judge's or magistrate's point of view that the person who's being charged does understand what the elements of the offence are, which means each of the separate things that have to be proved to show that that offence has been committed. And often people don't agree with just one particular element. And I see Alira nodding there, because it's very important, and that's exactly what she does all the time, make sure that one of them doesn't get up. But you will need to know that these are offences that have several different components, and so when the evidence is being given, you're interpreting in relation to each of those elements. They're not necessarily all proved in the same way at the same time. So there's the latitude of having to go through a case and listen to all the evidence. But it will help you if you understand which particular sort of offence is being mentioned in this particular case. Sometimes people are charged with offences at different levels, on the basis that if they don't get convicted of the worst one, they might still be convicted of the one on a level below. And so that will be a bit confusing until you realise that these are two separate possible charges for a similar type of offence, but depending on what gets proved on the day. So that will make you understand a bit better, I think, what the nuances are of some of the things in the courtroom. I think that's probably enough.
Thanks. Staying with interpreting in domestic and family violence matters, I might ask both Alira and Farah to talk about any special things interpreters should be aware of when they're interpreting in these matters, I guess both for victims and defendants in these matters. What are some tips you have? And I know, Farah, you have some tips about interpreters looking after themselves as well. So who wants to go first?
Alira.
Farah? Oh, Alira, okay.
Alira, go for it. Go.
Thanks, Farah. So I think so with domestic violence matters, as I briefly mentioned before, you know, these are really serious matters, and so having accurate interpreting and having some time, you know, to be listening to the client, and the client will often tell a monologue of a story that is really, really serious and really, really private. So I think some tips around that is just to be really empathetic in your listening, and finding appropriate ways to stop the client if they are going on for too long, so that you can interpret what they're saying as they go. It's just really honing those empathetic listening skills, I think, is a really good tip around that. And then I think, and Farah might comment more on this, but part of with domestic violence matters that most local courts will have a women's domestic violence court advocacy service like Farah's service and a safe room at court. So there's different ways that you might be in different rooms, getting the lawyer getting instructions from the client and you interpreting in a much more private environment, but in some courts it'll be in the foyer. And the reason I mention that is that the client herself may be very guarded in what she might disclose in a foyer setting rather than a private interview room, which might then impact on the instructions that the lawyer can get. So if you feel that the client might be hesitating, talking about certain things, raise that with the lawyer. You know, that if you think that there really needs to be a private room somewhere, or that whether the court sheriffs might need to move the defendant away if he's hanging around, your observation skills and your ability to pick up some of those non-verbal cues as well can be really helpful in the context of meeting with clients who have experienced family and domestic violence. So you're really crucial in terms of how we actually can progress things at that stage.
Thanks, Farah. Farah?
Yeah. Look, and in domestic and family violence as well situations, I have to acknowledge as well that interpreters like us as well, workers like solicitors, get exposed to really very, very sensitive and difficult collection of matters, whether it's a death, whether it's a heavy injury caused by, you know, relatives, and we are talking about matters where there is severe sexual abuse that takes place, and it is like there's women that are exposed and impacted, as well as children, which can be hugely impacting as well, and acknowledging that we are human beings actually, and we are there to do a duty and to deliver a job. So in relation to some of the challenges, it's definitely been observed that this ongoing issue that some interpreters find it really challenging to interpret sensitive topics, especially when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault, and we've got experiences with some interpreters who had to call to finish the phone call early because they did say to us that they were really upset from the recollection of events, which is when that happens. And as I said, what I will suggest is like a tip for that. It comes hand in hand in terms of looking after ourselves. And I know it's easy said, however, it's the job, and always to remind ourselves that we are human beings and it is okay, and we are allowed to feel upset. However, the main things in this role is like language is very important, confidentiality is very important, and knowledge is very important. So we have certain restrictions as well on us when we come to debrief. So potentially, as I said, allow ourselves to be upset, acknowledging that we are upset and has been distracted by a huge distracting matter. And always remember that this is not our life, and we are doing a job. This is not our issue, and we're not going to go home actually with it, though acknowledging that it could be very, very impacting, and actually having, as Alira said, empathy, not sympathy, and do not come to it with your cultural sort of background knowledge, which can be great, and be non-judgmental. So, and this is something that we experience that in the context of conversation, for example, because I know Arabic, I can hear sometimes, and it's not towards the Arabic interpreters, but for example, from my end, I would be able at times, and it has been rarely, to identify that interpreters are, trying to shorten the information that's been said because it's really harsh, trying to give their opinion or bringing their cultural opinion to it, and to be super engaged in the conversation. I think just reminding ourselves of the professional sort of standard all the time, and the fact that we are there to do a very valuable and important job, and trying to be as possible as we can, having that professional hat and being non-judgmental. One more thing is about, and I heard Sam, and I do acknowledge as well that debriefing with friends and family could be really helpful. However, I don't want to give like example that can be so identifying, but there are smaller and enclosed and in this respectful communities where having interpreters, we have the potential, and we've had it before, that the person who interprets is a family member or a friend, and because of confidentiality and privacy on a legal level and on a professional level as well, we would just like a gentle reminder, a courtesy reminder, that we need to be really mindful of who we share this or debrief the information with, and ensure this is the best option that's suitable for us to be as unidentifying as possible. We're talking about smaller communities where people go to the same mosque or church or playground, and everybody's children play with everybody else. So trying, as I said, to stick to this professional standard and acknowledge that we're humans at the same time. And confidentiality, paramount, and it's really, really important. And one more thing that I find, and it happened before, that once you identify that the person in front of you is a relative or a close friend, or this is the person from church, and you find it really confronting or challenging or overwhelming or frustrating doing that job, I don't think it should be embarrassing. As I said, following this professional standard, tell someone, tell the court officer, tell the magistrate. So it's not embarrassing, and it doesn't paint the person as unprofessional. On the contrary, acknowledging and declaring conflict can be really helpful for the person, for the magistrate, for the client, and for the interpreters themselves. And this could be as well part of self-care. And what I will suggest hugely is, because of the complexity of domestic and family violence, and I'm not sure whether this happens, is for interpreters across the board to receive specialized domestic violence, domestic and family violence training from experts, and actually acknowledge that there's too many different cultures, too many different backgrounds, how people perceive domestic and family violence, which could be highly a private matter in some cultures, and acknowledging that culture and religion had nothing to do, like it's not an excuse for culture. So for domestic violence, it's not an excuse for violence, because it's a complete different issue. And in Australia, the law of the land applies. So I would as well, maybe some professional judgment about debriefing, about professional sort of standard of the work, about the expectation of the role, about potentially how to manage difficult conversations, how to manage conflict, which I'm sure most people would know of, and some specialized, I would suggest, domestic and family violence training. We've done, I think, Alira, we've done too many as well before, and I will stop here.
Can I just say one very quick thing too? I was thinking as you were talking, Farah, particularly for new interpreters, the courts, I know, might make block bookings to have an interpreter for 1 or 2 languages perhaps appear very regularly on a very busy list day, and often that might be the day that the domestic violence list is on at court. So you might have, for example, Farah mentioned an Arabic interpreter. You might have a male Arabic interpreter that's booked to be there for the entire day. If there's a woman who's experienced family and domestic violence who may not feel comfortable talking about the details of that with a male interpreter, I suppose please don't be offended, if the lawyer or the domestic violence advocate might actually ask for a female interpreter over the phone, instead of using you at the court face to face. It just might be that there's some elements of that particular matter for the client from a trauma-informed perspective that it might be better to, in that circumstance, have a female interpreter. So that's quite normal, you know, if that comes up in your practice. As I said, if you're a new interpreter, don't be offended. We value your services face-to-face at the courts for sure, but it just might be in those circumstances we might do something a bit different.
And one more thing very quickly is do not be surprised as interpreters if you find yourself in hearings, for example, interpreting for both you know, sides. You know, you're doing it for the victim and the person of interest on the other end, and this could occur for too many reasons. So that's a challenge at a slight different level, where you will find yourself holding each side of this incident that had occurred, and it happens. And it does take place, but definitely, as I said, being professional, doing the job and doing what you do usually. And if you feel conflicted or challenged, please voice it.
Yeah, please understand too that if there are two people in a case on either side who both speak the language that you've come to interpret for, neither of them is your client in most cases where the court has booked the interpreter. The interpreter is a client of the court, and the obligation is to the court, not to the person who needs help with language. But it leads to many confusions, I think, on the part of a lot of people, not just the interpreters, but also the court staff or so on sometimes, that they expect the interpreter, who might be the only person in the court who speaks the language of one of the clients, to become that person's new best friend. Show them where the toilet is, show them where to go to lunch, explain all sorts of other procedural things to them. That's not the role of the interpreter. People might ask the interpreter to help with those things because people can't read the signs or something like that, but it's not the interpreter's job as part of their job at the court to do those things, to look after a person. And it's very important that you don't get so close to a person that people on both sides of the case are going to feel that you are less than professional and that you can't just do your job interpreting for the benefit of the court, where the court makes sure that everybody understands what's being said. So don't feel absolutely impelled to move into that role of becoming too close. You've got to be empathetic. You've got to understand the hidden issues that they might not be talking about for various reasons. But at the same time, you can't become their advisor or their confessor. So you just have to be extremely careful that you're still working for the court. And if you've got a Lyra there, you'll know that she'll keep you on the right track, but other lawyers will not fully understand that. So you just make sure that you take the professional line and you'll be all right, okay?
Thank you, Your Honour. Yeah, that's really important information, and we've had quite a few questions about that, like in a practical sense, what does an interpreter do if they're asked to help fill out a form, or they're approached and asked to where things are, like how do they practically respond to that?
Well, when I've finished dealing with a case and I have to get somebody sentenced, and I then decide that they need to enter a bond, they won't be going to jail, but they will have obligations, I always keep the interpreter beyond the hearing stage and ask them if they could go to the court office with the person, because it's going to be necessary for the registrar or the court officer there, when they fill out a bond or do anything else, to actually be able to interpret the document so the person understands what they're signing up for. And if we don't have the interpreter still there, we're not going to get on the phone at 4:15 in the afternoon and ask for an interpreter to tell somebody before they can leave the courthouse. So it's very, and particularly if it was a person in a mental health hearing, for instance, where they'd been required to enter some sort of a bond, under the Mental Health Act. They must understand what it is. And if we don't think they're capable of understanding the language, then we won't put them on that sort of an order anyway. So you've got to make sure that you're there. So you may be asked by the court to do certain things. And if the only thing you're being asked to do is to go outside with the court officer and yell the person's name with the right sort of accent so that we can get the right person into court, that's okay. Because when court officers go outside all the time and call all these names that they've got written on a list, they don't know if they're using the right accent, if they're expressing it properly, and there might be some completely different sounding name that they're supposed to be saying. I mean, it even happens with Irish people, so I wouldn't worry about everything else. Okay.
So, unfortunately, we're running out of time. There have been a lot of questions that we haven't been able to answer today, but all of that really helps us to prepare for another session like this. So we really appreciate everyone's questions and comments. And as I said, you will be getting an email afterwards with some links to information. So I might just ask everyone on the panel to give a final just 30-second wrap up of the purpose of this panel was for interpreters who perhaps are new to working in courts to become more confident, less intimidated by court. We didn't have time today to go into sort of court etiquette and setting up the inside of a courtroom. You might have known that this session was meant to be done inside a courtroom in Liverpool local court, but obviously that couldn't happen because of COVID-19. The plus side is that we were able to have many more people here joining us today. So hopefully this has been valuable for you. And I'm just going to get the panel to give a final words, tips for interpreters to improve their confidence. So if there's one thing you can take away for new interpreters, what would that be? Justice Sam, did you have any final words as well?
Maybe I will wait until all the panel finishes and then I do. Thank you. And
I should also say there'll be a survey that comes when you close the webinar, and we'd really love your feedback again to be able to do this again in the future and to improve what we're doing. So Magistrate Cock, Your Honour, I'd like you to, do you have any final words to pass on to the interpreters?
I think interpreters are doing a fantastic job, and their level of professionalism is usually very, very high. And I think that we're very well served, and I hope that we are serving them as well. When I first started working on this whole question of how we should be dealing with interpreters in court and what we could expect, the first thing we noticed, and all the interpreters told me about this, was there wasn't anywhere for them to stand or sit. There were no provision of any water glasses. They didn't know whether they could take notes. All of those things were so physically intimidating that getting to the actual time, and there wasn't a separate microphone for them to speak into and so on. The courtrooms have not been designed with interpreters in mind in the past. They're gradually improving, and as new ones are done, they are good. But so we are understanding what the needs are, but we're not yet fully capable. I was on the Building and Grounds Committee of the University of Sydney. We had disabled people at every sort of disability, and we had so many buildings to fix up that what we would do is get a list of all the people that were enrolled in the first year of a course, and we would say, right, which rooms are they going to have to go to? We will try and get those rooms fixed up this time, and next year we'll make sure that we can actually cover the rooms that they'll have to go to in their second year. And that's the only way that you could address a fundamental building problem that lasted for a long time. We're working better on it in the courts now. A lot of adaptation has taken place. But if you find things that are not sensible, let people know, tell the court officers, ask them to mention it to the magistrates. The magistrates get pretty proactive about trying to get things fixed up, actually. And this is a good way to do it. Talk to the registrars. Registrars are overwhelmed by the jobs that have to be done, but they will do what they can, and they'll pass it on up the line. And there's consultation within the court, or tell the regular practitioners, because they know how to mention things to people too, and they'll get things up the line as well. But be confident if you're not getting the right treatment and you feel it's affecting your work particularly, to mention it to whoever's presiding in the courtroom.
Thank you so much, Your Honour. There have been many comments about your wonderful contributions, and a very strong request to have you back for another panel. So hopefully even in your retirement, you'll still be able to join us. So thank you so much for your contributions today. Everyone has really appreciated it.
Good.
Registrar Fabienne Blanca, we just heard that registrars are very good people to go to for information, so we will turn to you now. Any final words for interpreters new to working in courts?
One thing I didn't mention with the COVID-19, we had to remove all the cups and the water in the courtrooms. So usually the interpreters have access to water and cups in the courtroom. They don't because of COVID-19. My advice would be to research your subject in court before you come to court, and also before you go to the courthouse where your assignment is in, go to searchable court lists online, or know how to quickly find which court the case is listed. If you're unsure, go to the registry office. I had an interpreter complain about one of the court officers in court about the way they were treated, and that was good because they gave me feedback, and I could change things, give that person some training. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Fabienne. Alira? There you are.
Okay, so as a final 30-second tip to help you build confidence, I think when you're interacting with any lawyer, just remember that 99.9% of, those lawyers won't speak the same language that you can. So your skills that you bring, that lawyer doesn't have. So your value that you bring to that interaction that the lawyer has with the client is just absolutely critical. So if you need a bit of confidence in being able to speak to the lawyer to say, you need to stop, I don't understand what you're talking about, or can you change the words here? I think a good tip is to have a look at the Legal Aid New South Wales website. There's a whole lot of fact sheets for free on that website, including very specific changes to the law around COVID-19. So if you're looking for very up-to-date information, there's a whole heap of fact sheets on the Legal Aid website. And Law Access website also has a significant amount of plain English, easy to read information. So if you're a new interpreter and you're getting used to what legal topics are out there and what you might be hearing at court, or even some of the processes at court, those two websites I think would be a really great place to start as well.
Thanks, Alira. Farah, would you like to give any final tips for interpreters working in the areas that you work in?
Well, look, the main thing I would say is look after yourselves, whatever that means for you, whatever activities that you would take, and just acknowledging that some phone calls, statements, some conversations are just tricky, distressing and challenging for yourselves and for us too, and that actually I do acknowledge and respect your role and capabilities. And let's remember one thing that we need, from service perspective and you, as we've been doing, to work together as partners and continue to provide each client with a voice. So actually the pride of the work you do, it's super important, and clients having a voice in domestic and family violence could save them and save their children from death. And thank you very much. You're all amazing and you're doing a great job. Just keep doing what you do.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Sam now to have a final word and thank our panel.
It was such an honor to have all of you helping us reach out to such a diverse group of people we have in the webinar. I was really overwhelmed to hear Natalie saying we had people joining us from all over Australia. That's such an amazing thing. For the interpreters who joined us today, you could see how much appreciation you have from court staff and people from the legal profession to you. We really encourage people who didn't take any assignments in the legal setting to do so. You heard our interpreter on the panel, Sam, said it's not that intimidating. Probably you have to take that step and go observe when things are better. I want to thank all our panelists. You guys are amazing, but I also want to thank our moderator today, Natalie. You're always a star. Thank you for running the whole show today. Thank you for reaching out for all those people and include them in the webinar. As Natalie said, we will love to hear from you, not only to deliver this again, but also to help you come and work in the legal setting. Back to you, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Sam. And I know this was advertised as interactive, and we have tried to do as much as we can to answer your questions. Hopefully we have. I know there were many more questions that we did not answer specifically, but that will help us to do another session to answer those questions. And hopefully one day we'll be able to go back into a court setting, and obviously it'll be smaller sessions, but we'll try and still keep doing those sessions. So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much to all your comments and suggestions, and we will include some further links in the email that you'll get in an hour's time. And as I said, there's another webinar next month on specifically legal words in criminal law matters, so there'll be a link to register for that too. So I just also wanted to say thank you to Sam for helping organise this. Thank you, Your Honour Magistrate Cock, to Farah. It's been lovely having you, and Fabienne and Alira in the room together there. That's worked really well. Thank you so much.
I want to say this webinar will be recorded as well, Natalie, and you want to give information?
That's right. It has been recorded, and that will go up on the Legal Aid YouTube channel, which will allow for closed captions, because obviously we apologise that there's no live captioning through GoToWebinar, but we'll have the captions on the recorded webinar, and hopefully more people can see it that way. So thank you to everyone for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you all here today, and there's some virtual flowers on the screen for you, since we're all in remote locations today, so you can pretend that we're handing you flowers. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks everyone.